Hello, everybody. We are going to get started in just a minute or two here. We'll let people get logged in. Hope everyone is having a great Wednesday, wherever you may be in this sweltering United States.
Sweltering. Oh gosh, I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia, and it is. Oof. Well, we have the nickname of Hotlanta, so we've been living up to that over the past couple of weeks actually.
Yeah. I'm in Denver, and we're going to get up into the 90s today, which is a pretty hot summer day for us. So
we've got you beat down here.
What'd you say, Heidi?
I said we've got you beat down here in Southwest Florida, man. I think yesterday we were at 107.
Oh, God.
Horrible. Horrible.
I think I'm gonna head back up north.
Right.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked off. It is top of the hour. I know that we'll have participants joining us. First of all, I just want to welcome you to our seminar. My name is Rebecca Burbridge, and as many of you know, PuzzleHR is one of the approved vendors with IBPI. If you attended the conference back in March in Florida, I was there. Met many of you, and as part of the services that we provide for IBPI members, these free seminars, we're going to be doing this on a quarterly basis. And so we're just very excited to be here today. Our topic of today is managing conflict, and this is managing conflict in the workplace. And so I had met with Mark Geis, and we had talked about different topics that may be of interest to you. After you've participated in this seminar, if you've got feedback, feel free to send that to me. If you've got topics that are of interest to you from an HR perspective, send that information to me as well. We want to make these as beneficial and interactive as we possibly can. So we'll be talking about managing conflict. And I do want to say that we have got do we have the chat feature on, or is it Q&A that they'll be able to use?
Q&A.
Q&A. Okay. So as we're moving through the seminar, if you've got questions on what we're specifically talking about, please put your questions into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we're going to answer those questions to the best of our. If there's anything that we missed during the seminar, we will hit that at the end of the seminar. So with that, we're going to get us kicked off. As I mentioned, my name is Rebecca Burbridge. I am one of the founders of PuzzleHR. I'm a vice president. I am here in Denver, as I mentioned earlier, and just really excited to have this inaugural IBPI webinar with all of you. And I'll turn it over to Heidi.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see everyone, although we can't see you. I am Heidi Hernandez. I'm one of the facilitators of learning here at PuzzleHR. People development is my true passion. So it's exciting to be here with you guys discussing. This is a tricky topic, managing conflict, dealing with difficult people, all those things. So excited to glean some of our wisdom on you today. Derek, I'll pass it to you.
Awesome. My name is Derek Higgs. I am a learning consultant here at PuzzleHR. And just recently, I celebrated my 1-year anniversary here, so I'm excited about that. And yes, we are here to talk about managing conflict. And that's, it's interesting because a lot of people have issue with that and think about conflict. Whenever we think about conflict, we get a negative emotion. It brings about negative feelings, right? But you know what? Conflict is very, very necessary. Very, very necessary. So we're going to dive right in and jump in and so on and so forth. When it comes down to conflict, and managing conflict, we have this training that we do called the 5 dysfunctions of a team. The foundational issue, the foundational dysfunction is trust. The next one is conflict. So we're going to talk about those 2 today, and we're going to start off with trust. So actually, Heidi, I was going to ask this of you, but I'm going to ask this of Rebecca. Rebecca, why is trust the foundation? Why do we, when you think about all the years of experience you have in leadership and so on and so forth, why is trust the foundation when it comes down to managing conflict?
When you start with trust, I think trust allows open communication. Trust is safe. People feel safe because they trust you, right? And we're being honest, we're being transparent. And I really want to emphasize that as leaders, we are being honest and we are being transparent. It's very easy as a leader, if you're new to the role, or even if you've been in the role for a while, to put on that stoic presence. I can handle this. I've got everything. But you're not showing emotion. You're not showing your true self, and people don't connect with you as well. It also leads to distrust. They don't know if they can trust you. So that foundation of trust and the ability to have open communication and a safe place to have conversation is really important.
Good stuff, good stuff. And, and when you look at that definition, right, and see down there where it says it creates and builds vulnerability, right? That's very, very important. In your years of experience, have you had any issues, or do you have a story that you can tell us regarding being vulnerable? And I ask that's a loaded question because I know that you do.
You do. Yeah, you know this for a fact. When I first got into leadership, I moved from a co-worker role to a leader role with that team. And that was really difficult because I was walking in the shoes of that person, and that's my point of view. But the other thing is, I immediately thought, as a leader, I can't show any emotion. I can't show anything to my team. I just have to have this tough exterior. I can get it done. Bull in a china shop almost is the way that I came across. And very quickly, I learned that people want to connect with me, and that goes back to the trust. And the way that they connect with me is that I allow myself to be vulnerable. I tell them what I'm feeling, right? And in doing so, I'm setting the example for them to tell me what they're feeling as well. But with that first team, that first 6 months, I was just this stoic, I can get it done type person, robot, if you will. And fortunately, the person who was developing me as a leader had me do a 180 with my team. And if none of you know what that is, that's where you're getting true feedback from the people who report to you, and then the people who you work with, who you co-work with, right? Your counterparts. And that feedback was very good for me. It was, hey, we liked you as a person when you were in this other role because we knew you. And now you turned into this stoic leader that we don't feel we can approach, we don't trust. And so that was really good feedback. And as a new leader, man, I took that to heart. And I took it to heart, and I took my heart and I kind of put it out there for them, right? So that and I connected with people, not just in the team meetings, but in the one-on-one time, right? Have the time, take that time to connect with them so that they can see that they can trust you. And so that was a hard lesson because it was a terrible 180. But then when I did a 360, which is my counterparts, my upper level leadership, people below me, a year after that, it was a dramatic difference. So.
Awesome. Awesome. And that's the thing, so when we talk about the 5 dysfunctions of team, right? Trust is the foundation. You got to have that before you can move into even thinking about managing conflict, right? And I'm going to put that up on the screen. I'm going to read that to you guys. Engaging in conflict around ideas, right? Well, with trust, keyword trust, team members can engage in unfiltered, constructive, debate of ideas. And that's very, very important. But we're going to dive a little more into trust. And Heidi, so I'm going to ask you, as we sit here and talk about this dysfunction, the absence of trust, and I'm going to go ahead and put that up on the screen. I'm going to ask you this question, why is being vulnerable with each other critical to accomplishing, let's say, team goals? And before you do that, I'm going to go ahead and read that to you all. Members of great teams trust one another on a fundamental emotional level, and they are comfortable being vulnerable. That's the key word, vulnerable with each other about their weaknesses, mistakes, fears, and behaviors. They get to a point where they can be completely open with one another without filters. And see, Rebecca, you just mentioned that. Well, Heidi, can you, expand on that a little more?
So, I mean, when we think of healthy, if you can think about like a healthy, well-functioning team, whether you're in business for yourself, just joining us here, or you run an organization, or you run a team, whatever it is, you're in contact with people around you that you're forming relationships with. If they're going well, right? You're getting things done. I think of trust as when it, like, we can define it by, I can share my ideas and feelings without fear of you looking at me like I'm crazy. We call that around here like checking your face, right? I want to share something with Rebecca and Derek, and I might not think the same way that they do on a particular issue, and their face doesn't look at me like you're nuts, right? We've been there. That would just make the walls go up and my trust wouldn't be there, right? So when you think about having a level of trust inside of a healthy team, creating vulnerability, it allows a team to accomplish greater goals. Why? Because people are more open, right? Like you said, Rebecca, right? Your team was more open with you because you were more human with them, right? You let your walls drop and your guard down and shared, and you demonstrated vulnerability always first as the leader. And then your team follows suit whenever they start to feel comfortable. So the goals of the team start just naturally happening. I think of our team here at Puzzle HR and learning, and we do happen to have a very healthy team. Now, I've not always been on healthy teams. I come from a very hefty sales background. No judgment to salespeople because I am a recovering one. However, sales teams a lot of times are very cutthroat. People are out for themselves and very driven. It's not in a bad way, but a lot of times those desires to be number one can get a little, muddy the waters a little bit with ambition and drive and stepping on each other's toes or stepping over one another. But our team here is very healthy, and it shows up in us getting a lot done. We're very productive. We think very differently from one another. When our leader, opens up conversation, we don't always think the same, right? Recently, last week, I can think about it. Derek, I mentioned this to you before we were preparing for this today. We were talking about a particular set of trainings, and our team of 8 liked them, and Derek did not, and felt very comfortable sharing his reasoning why. And we all were very open to see his perspective, very curious with where he was coming from, because our leadership team has really worked to demonstrate and be open and vulnerable with us, and then encourage us to do the same thing. And I think it just gets the most out of the team.
Hey, Heidi, I want to expand on that just real quick. I was just thinking when I was talking about the 180 that I did, where we were getting feedback from my team, right? They were being vulnerable with me by giving feedback, even though it was anonymous feedback. They were being vulnerable with me. Here's where the trust comes in. When I took that information and I applied it to myself, and I showed them that I listened to what they said, and I applied it to the team, and I applied it to myself, and they saw that they could trust the information that they gave me, and that they could be safe with giving me that kind of feedback, and that it would better the team for the greater good of the entire team, right? It's what I did with that information. How did I respond, right? What did they see in action that they could trust that I was a safe place and I would take action with the information they were giving me?
Awesome. That's good stuff. It reminds me of listening to you talk about what happened last week, Heidi. It reminded me of something else. And as we go into the definition, I'm actually going to go ahead and put that on the screen so you guys can look at that while I tell this story. So Heidi, you told the story of how comfortable I felt, right? Being able to, and think about it. I was one person. I've only been here a year. We were discussing this, and I was the one person who had an adverse, let's call it adverse thought process to this particular set of trainings or what have you. But I felt very comfortable in sharing that, right? And say, hey, look, you know what? I'm the one guy who's like, this is not going to work. I don't think this should work. I don't think we should do it this way, so on and so forth. And we were able to engage in that conversation. Basically, there was some level of conflict, but because of the trust that I had, because Carla, our boss, is very vulnerable. She has done a very good job of creating that kind of environment where we are vulnerable, not just her being vulnerable as a leader, as Rebecca had said earlier, how she was vulnerable to the rest of her team, right? Those that reported to her. But, Carla's done a very good job of building an environment where we are vulnerable with each other, right? So I felt real comfortable just, hey, you know what? I know you guys think this, but I ain't feeling it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and it reminded me of a situation years and years ago, when I used to be a software engineer, and the opposite was true, right? The leader that we had, not only did we not have that vulnerable environment, but he actually broke trust. Yes, he did. He broke trust. And that just threw everything awry, right? Then when we had these conflicts, or let's say we had a meeting like we had last week, where, people had adverse ideas, so that they were afraid to actually bring it up. And we're going to talk about that, the fear of the conflict. So we had a lot of issues on that team and in that environment. And it all started because of lack of trust and the lack of vulnerability. So that's good stuff. But I want to touch on this. So you say, what is trust? This is our definition. You can go look up different definitions on Google and so on and so forth. But I'm gonna read that first bullet. Trust can be defined as the firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or the strength of someone or something. Give that some thought. And when I look at bullet number 2, the thing that affected our team on that last team that I told you about, where we didn't have the trust and vulnerability, was the integrity, right? Integrity was a big issue. So when you have that trust is that foundation, because you can't even dive into conflicts and so on and so forth without having that trusting environment, as you had mentioned, Heidi. So that's awesome, awesome. So any thoughts here from you guys when it comes down to, when you look at that definition, any thoughts that come to mind?
Yeah, I definitely, when it really is, trust is one of those things that, whether, again, if you're in leadership or you're an individual contributor, or you own your own business and you're leading the company, whatever, it's one of those things that we can't put a price on or an ROI on, so we don't focus on. We just don't. It's one of those, like hidden silent thunders, I guess, right? That when it goes really well, it moves the organization forward, and you can't really figure out why you're scratching your head, like what's going so well here. But when it's absent, you can see it so glaringly, and I think about, how our team functions right now in previous teams that I've been on in the past, or previous relationships that I've had in the past with partnerships or whatever. It's just, things clip along so well when trust is there. It really does, because then we're free to speak, right, Derek? I mean, if you think about, you're the one individual on a team of 8 that felt differently than we did about a particular issue, whatever the issue is, it doesn't even matter. The reason we didn't look at you like you were crazy is because we trust your intentions. We know you, right? There's a level of connection. We spent time together as a team. And I trust where your mind is, that you want the best thing for our organization. You want the best thing for, our team, for our clients, for the client experience. That's why our ears open up when somebody thinks differently than us, because you have that foundation, right? When someone wants to play the contrarian or wants to lean the opposite direction than you, it's okay, right? We can think different. It's all in how we approach it.
That's
awesome. I love it. I love it. Hey, Derek, we got a question on trust. The question is, can you resolve conflict if trust hasn't yet been built? Okay, so if we don't have trust, is there a way that we can resolve conflict? I want to take this question because absolutely, there's going to be plenty of times where you're pitch hitting for a coworker, or you've just inherited a new team, you've just started a new leadership role, or you're brand new to the organization yourself. You're new and there is a conflict and something has to be dealt with. Yes, absolutely. What we're talking about with trust is something that is built over time and that you lead by example. So when you have the conflict, it is something that you need to deal with, whether you're an employee, whether you're a leader in the team, it is something that needs to be dealt with. And as a leader, I really want to emphasize this. It's super important that you deal with it. Okay, whether the trust has been built or not, they need to see that this is not something you're afraid to do. And then you need to lead by example. How is the conflict dealt with, right? Make sure that you understand what the conflict is. Make sure that you've gathered enough information to make an informed decision. Whether, again, you're an employee or a leader, but don't just take one person's word unless the conflict is only with them. Make sure that you've got enough information to make an informed decision, and then make that decision as a leader for the team or individually with that person. So I want you to lead by example, because this is actually building trust when you're forced into this kind of a position.
Good stuff. Good stuff. And I'm glad you mentioned that. That's some good stuff. One thing when it comes down to trust, before we leave the slide, a lot of times we think of it individualistically. Like, I don't trust that individual.
Mm.
As leaders, it's important to understand that we need to talk about that environment, right? Like I just mentioned earlier, the environment that we have here at Puzzle, where we all feel comfortable, you know, even diving into any kind of conflict because of, you know, the environment of trust that's been built. But yeah, but Rebecca, you bring up a very good points. You know, what happens if you're just diving in and, you know, the environment hasn't been set yet? So that's some good stuff. Awesome, awesome, awesome.
Mhm.
And that kind of leads into this next thing, you know, the impact that it has on business, right? And it's very important, you know, because that's what we're here for, right? We can talk about trust and all these different things. And, you know, the increased productivity enhances problem solving, better communication. It's very important that we look at it as, hey, guess what? What's the impact on business? Like I look back at that example that I gave you guys when we were, and when I was a software engineer, that lack of trust and the issues and not being able to manage conflict severely affected the team and the results that we were coming. Yeah. And we had some, I mean, hellacious meetings because of it, right? We missed deadlines, things, issues, problems weren't getting resolved. There was a lot of finger pointing and blaming. I mean, the lack of trust really just took us down a negative rabbit hole, right? And so therefore we couldn't even get to the point of really truly managing conflict in a positive way. And I think, you know, when I look at these, you know, increased productivity, enhanced problem solving, and having better communication, you know. And so, you know, Heidi, so when you look at these three, which one stands out to you?
Ugh. I mean, all three of them, but I'm getting triggered, if I'm being honest, because I'm just putting myself back into different teams that I've been on, not at PuzzleHR, folks. But I mean, communication is huge. And I think about the behavior that shows up when trust isn't present is, for me, like as I watch teams and teams that I've been on in the past, you know, a leader is running a team meeting, right? And no one's talking. Been there?
Yeah.
We've been there,
Yeah.
right? I've led that meeting. I've been a part of that meeting. I'm like, what's going on with everybody? What's happening? People, you know, the leaders asking for things to get done. People are sitting around like this, like, I'm not raising my hand, right? I've been in that situation. I'm not raising my hand because I feel like I'm doing everything and no one else is held accountable, right? And this stuff is not being talked about. So when the opposite happens and there is, you know, a level of trust as a team, people are open and honest, and I've got too much on my plate this week. Can somebody take this? Right? So it looks different at a team meeting, or I'd love to tackle that. I'm just going to need some help and guidance around that because I've never tackled that before. So I'm able to communicate that, as opposed to being nervous about saying, I've never done this before, but I'm happy to take a crack at it. I'm not going to say that if I don't trust that my team's not going to look at me like, you're weak, you don't know what you're doing, you should already have this skill set, Heidi, right? So, I mean, the impact on business is it could shut the whole company down if there's not a level of that solid foundation, because we need high performers, we need problem solvers, we need innovators, we need people that want to collaborate. And you do that when there's a level of safety. Safety and trust are interchangeable. Safety is the buzzword, right, of 2024. Everybody wants to feel a level of safety inside of their organization, right? Again, I can share something and I know these two are not going to look at me like I'm nuts, even though I might be nuts, folks. I could be, but they're not going to at least make me feel like this. They're going to say, we're going to dial into her, let her be her, right? She'll figure it out. We're going to guide her along the way. So, I mean, it's essential for the business. And when you see the output, it is, again, it's one of those tricky things from a leadership level, whether you own the organization or you own your own business, or you're a leader of a team, or you're an individual contributor of a team. We don't focus on trust being the issue. We focus on what we can see with our eyeballs, and we can see numbers and finance and marketing, and let's cut there and cut there and cut there. But typically this is the real root of the problem.
Good stuff. Good stuff. And it's awesome because we spend, as you guys say, hey, we're here to talk about conflict. We spend a lot of time talking about trust because that is, like I said, the foundational issue. You know, and I took a note and I wrote this down. When trust is lacking, conflicts escalate. That's one of the main reasons why it's so important to make sure that we build a trust, an environment around being vulnerable and trusting, right? Because those conflicts escalate. And I think back to that negative example when I was a software engineer. And that's exactly what happened. I told you about the hellacious meetings we had. I mean, people calling each other names. I mean, it got really bad because when you didn't have that level of trust, and then those conflicts just escalated over time. And it was, I tell you, it was terrible. And the thing is, you know, when you're in that kind of environment, I didn't feel safe. I mean, I'm gonna speak for myself, right? You know, and matter of fact, it goes back to what you said, Heidi, regarding the conversation we had, the meeting we had last week. I felt safe, right? So, you know, we think about how different ways to make people feel safe, right? So you can have that trusting environment. You want to make sure that you engage, right? As you see, they're actively engaged with team members. Practice, and this is one of my favorites, active. I say, it says listen. I like to say active listening. Listening is a skill. It's not something that you just do. Like, for instance, if you're just standing there, you can hear things, right? You can hear a car, like I just heard a car drive by the house, right? But I wasn't really listening. Listening, you really have to pay attention and really absorb, like, what did you hear? How did you hear it? What was the tonality? So on and so forth. Listening is truly a skill. So it's very important that we focus in on that. And it's interesting, many years ago, I was told this, because I do a lot of talking, right? I talk for a living now, but I do a lot of talking. And somebody once said, you know, Derek, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, which means you should listen twice as much as you speak. And at the time, they were being kind of negative because I was running my mouth too much. But luckily, I was mature enough to realize what they were telling me. That there are times, see, when we think of communication, many times people have said, Derek, you're a great communicator. They'll see me on the stage, they see me in front of a room, and they go, oh, you're a great communicator. Speaking is only part of communication. Listening is the other part. So I was asking why, what makes me a great communicator? They said, oh, because you can talk, you can do this. It's always things I do with my mouth, but they don't mention anything about my ears. So I started being more intentional about not always, you know, speaking and getting better at listening and active listening. So you want to engage, learn to be an active listener, and share. Be transparent. That goes back to what we talked about as far as being vulnerable, right? Right? You want to make sure you share and be transparent. What do you guys' thoughts when you look at this slide? What jumps out at you?
I think of many things, friends, many things, I think. And one of the main things is really practically. So this is how to make people feel safe. Everybody wants to know how to do it. I don't know how to do it, how to make people feel safe. And it's engage, listen, and share, or just 3. You can Google a million other things. But engage, to me, in our virtual world, if any of you there work virtually like we do here, the greatest piece of advice that I can give you is to pick up the phone, to call and connect with people and let them see your face, right? And give them your full attention. I have worked for people in the past where our meetings were like this. Yeah, what do you got for me? And they're over here, right? And I'm like, I want to see you. And I need to know that you're paying attention to me because I'm bothered by this. And you can't see my tone and my body language if you're looking over here, right? So pick up the phone. If you're in an office and your door's always shut, open the door, right? An open door lets people know they can come in, walk out, see what people are doing, right? Actually, like, what can I help you with? What are you working on? What's tricking you up? Really practically, that's kind of how you actually, you know, can make people feel safe and listen to them. So they're sharing more openly. We are in a world of multitaskers, myself included, guilty, right? TikTok for the win, everybody, right? Scrolling, LinkedIn, all the things, right, Derek? Come on.
Yeah.
So we have to practice active listening, right? And giving people our full attention, whether you're on the phone and they can't see you, or you're in a Zoom meeting and you shut everything else down so we can be here. Very practically, I have to shut down my email. I have to shut down anything that's not attached to me talking to you guys and to delivering a training so you can get the best out of me and I can give you my best. If I am distracted by what's coming in my email box, that's going to win. And you're not going to get the best of me because I'm like the squirrel. I'm kind of one of those individuals, right? Shiny object syndrome. I can't. So do yourself a favor and shut that stuff down and give people your full attention. Just my 2 cents.
Awesome. Rebecca, did you?
Yeah, the thing that pops out at me is share. I just want to encourage leaders on this call that who you show up in a one-on-one or on an individual conversation needs to be exactly who you show up as a team. A lot of leaders have, especially if you've been promoted, you've got these relationships with certain people on the team that you like, and then there could be certain people on the team that you didn't like when you were coworkers. And then you move into this leadership role, and you still have that familiarity and with those folks, and you have got to show up consistent in one-on-ones, in individual phone calls, just as you do as the team. Part of that consistency builds trust. So when you're sharing, okay, don't be two people. Don't be two different people, depending on who the audience is.
Yeah.
Good
Well, and
stuff.
call just from a leadership standpoint, Rebecca, I hear that so loudly, especially when it's been done to me from my leader level. Call your people just to check in.
Yeah.
No initiative. I don't need anything from you. We always need stuff from people, right? I mean, this is the business we're in. We need stuff from everybody. We got stuff to do. Call them just to check in. It will, I'm telling you, it humanizes you. There is a gap between a leader and an individual contributor by title. I tell Rebecca, you got a big bad title, girl. Vice president of anything separates you and I. So you have to work very hard to alleviate that gap, right? She does, because she's the leader.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's awesome. It's awesome. And before we move to the next slide, I want to say this, talking about VPs, I report directly, and I believe you do, Heidi, as well, directly to a VP, Carla Verdi, who's a VP of Learning and Development. And when you talked about those check-ins, and I told you I just recently, celebrated my 1-year anniversary here, it was those check-ins that helped make things easier for me, right? It helped, build that transparency, the vulnerability. She and I get on and we'll giggle and laugh about different things. And it kind of, I didn't see her as VP, right? Like you mentioned, you talk about titles, the titles, oh gosh, she's the VP, but she doesn't walk around like that. It reminds me of Knights at the Round Table, where everybody's kind of equal. She's still the head knight, but she doesn't operate that way. Does that make sense?
For sure.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
100%.
Good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're going to transition to self-reflection.
Yes, I'm going to lead this one, Derek, if you don't mind.
Okay, sure.
This is when we think about learning and development, the three of us really sit to develop individual soft skills, help you do the things that you need to do, like manage conflict, have higher levels of emotional intelligence, all those things, so you can go out and people more effectively. One of the greatest tools for developing yourself is self-reflection, and we're in such a busy time in the world, I'm sure you are as well, where we don't take the time or make the time to self-reflect. So we're going to give you a couple minutes to do it right here. So we want you to think about, just for a couple minutes, not forever, how are you working right now to create an environment of trust, either inside of your organization, inside of your partnerships, if you're in sales, if you're owning your own company, whatever it is. How are you doing that? By some of the things that we've talked about, through engagement, through listening well, through sharing and leading by example. So we're going to give you some time to kind of think through that. And we're not going to judge you based on your answers. It's between you, your pen, and your paper only. Although we'll judge them while they're working, we're going to judge them, right, guys?
Absolutely.
Just
kidding. I'm going to add one thing. So the question says, how are you? But some of us may not be. So then I would say, answer it this way. How will you, right? Think about the things we talked about today. Think about the stories that Rebecca and Heidi shared. So how are you? And then think about how will you going forward?
I love that.
I do too. I love what you said, Rebecca, as they're thinking about this from a an individual, with your level of leadership experience, leading very successful teams for years and decades. I mean, for a very long time, just taking the step to share something that just makes you more human. I think taking that first step really, really makes a big impact to someone like me that's an individual contributor. You just can't put a price on it, because again, it just bridges that gap between leader title and someone that might feel like I need to have it all together, or I'm new to the organization and I should already know this. They hired me to be an expert. I'm scared to share. But when you share, it makes things so much better. I don't know. It really does.
Hey, Derek, can we have, now that we've had some time to kind of reflect on this, would any of you be willing to anonymously put in the Q&A just what your reflection is? There something that you want to start doing, something that you feel like you are doing? Do you guys want to put that feedback in the Q&A section for us? And it is anonymous.
Great question.
That would be great
Yeah.
stuff. So we spent a lot of time talking about trust, right?
That's right.
That foundation. You know, it's interesting when you look at the pyramid, right, of the 5 dysfunctions of a team. You know, it goes up like this. The biggest slice is the one at the bottom, trust, which means we should spend most of our time making sure that we build from there, right? Not just foundation, but even how much time we spend. And the next piece is conflict.
Hey, wait, Derek, before we hop in, I just want to share with you guys, one of you guys did respond, and you do monthly check-ins. It's something that you do on a regular basis, is a monthly check-in. So we got some feedback from you on that. Just got some other feedback. Just in those monthly check-ins, it's connecting with them on a personal level, it sounds like how is the family? How are the kids? Did you have a good weekend? I love that feedback. I'll tell you, when I was learning to be a leader, one of the best pieces of advice I received was from my direct leader who was developing me. And he said, whenever you have a one-on-one, so we have weekly one-on-ones here at Puzzle. If it's monthly, weekly, biweekly, whatever it is, that's your special time with that person. Nothing interrupts that unless it's hair on fire emergency. But he always told me, start with the person. Don't start with business. Don't start with anything else. It's just what that feed you doing. How is your family? Tell me what the plans are for the weekend. Anything special coming up? Get to know them as a person. And for me, it wasn't just listening. I wrote stuff down. Because for me, as a learner, I have to hear and I have to write at the same time, but then I'm able to recall information better. And when I recall information with that individual person, that was personal, right? Then we're having that one-on-one, and 3 months later, I recall that information. They know I was listening. And then I heard what they said. So I love that feedback. Thanks for sharing that with us.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Good stuff. Like I said, we talked a lot about trust. The next layer is dealing with conflict. And I say that, but it's not conflict. Conflict isn't the issue. It's usually the fear of conflict, right? And when we think about that, you know, I think about the fear of conflict. And basically all that is a passionate, it should be just a passionate, unfiltered debate around a particular issue or topic. That's all it should be, right? But unfortunately, you know, it doesn't always turn out that way, right? And I'm going to throw this continuum on the screen. And I love this continuum because I always ask this question. So you see on one end, you have artificial harmony, right? And then you have the mean-spirited attacks. As a matter of fact, I think Heidi and I both mentioned that earlier. In previous, you know, companies, we had those meetings that got hellacious and had some mean-spirited attacks and so on and so forth. But I'm going to ask this question to you guys. This is something off the cuff. When you look at that, I've heard and I've read where artificial harmony can be just as destructive as mean-spirited attacks. How is that? How would you guys answer that?
Well, I call it fake positive, Derek, right? You can picture, right? It's kind of like Pleasantville, whatever that movie was called, where everybody's just the Stepford Wives, where everybody's so happy and perfect, but you know, stuff's bubbling, right? And that stuff needs to come out, right? It does, or it's going to explode. So you've got, like, you know, fake positive artificial harmony inside of a team or inside of partnerships over here. And then you have people that are just, you know, slinging mud on the other end. But there does need to be, like, right in the center before it's, like, you know, nasty. There needs to be some type of healthy debate. And I think if we reframe, the author of the book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, we're not selling it, guys, but it is kind of one of the bedrocks of what we teach over here, because it's just proven through organizations and leadership and, you know, Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 companies. It's an outstanding resource. You know, conflict is really the passionate pursuit of truth, as the author refers to it, or getting to the best possible outcome, right? So if there's an issue that's weighing the company down or weighing the team down, or you can't move past, whatever it is, the goal is to get to the best possible outcome. It's not always going to be your idea. It's not always going to be Rebecca's idea, even if she's the leader. She might make the final yes or no, right? But the goal is to hear, right? Because we can get the best out of a lot of people. But somewhere right before things get destructive is the ideal point of conflict.
Absolutely.
Hey,
You know,
Derek. Derek, I was
Yeah,
just going to say, when I see this slide as a leader, and something that I've seen other leaders make the mistake of doing is they let that fear of conflict not let them move forward. And they don't deal with scenarios, they don't deal with situations. And the team sees that, what you're allowing, right? How high is the bar on your team? And it's pretty darn low if you're not going to deal with what needs to be dealt with on your team. To be able to work through the conflict and come to resolution. They want you to do that as a leader.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Rebecca, I think it's because they don't know how. And I know we're going to jump into that, right? I'm avoiding it because I've not seen it demonstrated well. I don't actually have the tools to know how to do that. Conflict resolution is one of those things that, here's the great news, you can improve like a muscle. You can literally step into the conversation with the right mindset and move forward. That's really what it's about, is they just don't know how.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are two things when I look at this, and you know, and other times when I've trained on this, when I look at artificial harmony, Heidi, you mentioned something about Pleasantville. I call it the fine family, right? How's everything going? Fine. Everything's fine. Oh, that's fine. Oh, no issues. Everybody's fine. So I call it the fine family. Right? So that can be very destructive because, as you mentioned, Rebecca, that's where things don't get dealt with. And as we mentioned earlier, right, things can escalate and those conflicts become more of an issue. And Heidi, you kind of touched on it. You talked about that ideal point of conflict. You want to be right in the middle somewhere, right? Where you want to have that passionate debate, but you want to stop before it gets destructive and you start heading towards those mean-spirited attacks.
Exactly.
Right? And I think of I go back to that time when I was a software engineer, and I tell you, we were way over on the mean-spirited attack side. Names are flying, you know, all kinds of stuff was going on. And it made things so much worse, you know, when it came down to it. So it's important that we recognize that one thing is not conflict. Conflict is very good. As a matter of fact, we have a training here at Puzzle where we teach people how to mine for conflict.
Right.
Hey, let's try to find those issues that we have so we can deal with them. As you just said, Rebecca, when you don't deal with them, guess what? Things get worse, or stuff gets done, or you know, stuff gets swept under the rug, or what have you. So we actually, you know, encourage people and teach them how to mine for that conflict. Because it's not the conflict that's a problem. It's when you don't deal with it, and it's the fear of it that stops you from dealing with it. Those are the issues that I see.
Hey, Derek, we've got two questions here. The first question is, if a conversation gets destructive, how can we bring it back to constructive? So we've moved over to the right-hand side here. It is a destructive conversation. So that's one of the questions that we've got here. And then we've got another one after that.
All right. So I'll tackle that one real quick. And Heidi, I'm gonna let you piggyback on it. What I would say is this. The one thing I would do is number one, once you the key thing is to recognize it first, right? So once you recognize that it's starting to head towards, you know, that destructive side, is I always tell people to pause. Let's take a step back, right? And you know, it's funny because whenever we're dealing with anything, we always deal with it emotionally first, right? So I always say pause so that you can take time to deal with it rationally, right? So take pause so you can process so that you can deal with it rationally and not emotionally. So you can basically respond instead of react. So that's the first thing I always take, is to pause, you know, and acknowledge, hey, you know what, guys, hey, it's getting a little emotional. Let's take, and then acknowledge it to everyone. Let's take a step back, right? And then let's try to approach it where we get rid of all the emotion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's the first way I would answer that. Did you guys want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say it better, Derek, quite honestly. There's been plenty of times where I was so angry about a particular thing, whether I was, you know, training a team or working with a team or whatever. And, you know, they were demonstrating behaviors that I was there to teach them not to do. Right. And I'm like, I'm watching it happen right here. Like, you're doing it. I need you doing this and you're doing this. And this is going to make my head explode. And so I need to pause. right? And give myself permission to have the conversation, but it doesn't have to be right now. Like, we need to do this meeting a different time, right? Because things are getting elevated. That's usually me. I can tell I'm not ready to have this conversation yet, but I want to. I just don't want to say something that's going to damage our relationship and our partnership, because I'm staying focused on what I really want. And I want a healthy partnership, right? I don't want to be right. And right now, I just want to be right. So I just need to step away, but let's get something on the calendar so we can, talk about this. It's not months going down or even weeks going down the road. It does need to get resolved. So you can't put a price on pausing.
Yep. So I always
Yeah.
say this, pause so you can process, so that you can respond instead of react, right? And that's one of the things that I would say there. And also, it's very important that we acknowledge, you just want to acknowledge, hey, I understand if that things are getting a little emotional, because sometimes people, it's not always about being, right. They just want to be heard.
Yep.
Right. So what happens is usually when things are heading to that emotional realm, that's because people are arguing, trying to win instead of trying to understand the other person's perspective, right? They're just trying to win. I got to win, that kind of thing. So, Rebecca, you about to say something?
No, I love this part of the conversation. Pausing, taking time, and saying to the team, we're going to pause this conversation. We have moved from constructive to destructive. And I don't like the tone that I'm hearing, and I don't like how we're interacting together. So I'm going to table this conversation as a leader. We're going to table this conversation. We're going to pick it back up at this time, but we're going to pause, right? As a team, we're going to pause. Take that on yourself and lead by example. Show them how to do it, okay? So that then your team individually, when they have individual conversations or there's conflict individually, know what you expect of them. Lead by example, right? Yeah. Say it out loud, right? And I know that there's a fear of conflict. There's so many fears in life. But if you don't move that ball forward, then it just festers and turns into a huge mess. It is your responsibility to overcome your fear and move that ball forward and lead by example.
Awesome. This is good stuff. So how do we effectively, right, move into conflict resolution?
Right.
What are your thoughts? When you think of, how do so basically, what is effective conflict resolution?
Well, I mean, it's getting to the best possible outcome with people being able to voice their thoughts, weigh in on the particular issue, whatever's at stake, right? It's listening, hearing, and getting to the best possible outcome. When I think about conflict resolution, I think, when am I ready to step into the conversation? That's when I'm ready to actually have the conversation. Is my head right? Is my heart right? Ultimately will get me to resolution. And I mentioned, there have been plenty of times where either I was mentoring a group of people, I was developing a group of people, and the way that their body language was reading, first, I always check myself. Am I boring them? Am I not engaging them? That's part of our job here as people developers, is to be engaging and keep things exciting and involve people so people aren't, falling asleep. So first I check myself, and then I have to, kind of check, what I'm seeing. But there's been plenty of times where I'm just not ready to, have that particular conversation until I'm able to stay focused on what I really want. I have to check my intentions. We all have to check our intentions. What do you really want? Well, I really want you to learn how to, effectively behave in a meeting, or I really want you to learn how to build effective client relationship. Right? That's really what I want. And what I'm seeing is not showing me that that's happening. Right? So I need to be able to, verbalize that without getting so emotional. Derek, you mentioned that everything that we experience is emotion first. We're happy, we're sad, we're angry, we're fearful of something, whatever the case may be. So we have to pause the emotion first until we can step in with the right mindset.
Love it. And we're going to talk about how to have those those tough conversations, because even though we mine for conflict, like I said, we encourage our clients to do that. You want to find but how do you have those difficult conversations. We're going to talk about what we call the SBI model, right? We discuss the situation, right? Describe the situation, what actually happened, provide some context or what have you. Then you want to talk about the behavior. So you have the SBI. So now you want to talk about the behavior. Describe what you observed, right? And also, then you want to talk about the impact that behavior had on you, on the project, or what have you. And then you want to ask for their thoughts. So again, it's SBI, right? You want to talk about the situation, right? And stick to the facts, leave out the emotion, stick to the facts. So talk about the situation, talk about the behavior that you saw, that you observed, talk about how it impacted either you or the project or the team, and then say, hey, what are your thoughts? Do you guys have an example that you can share, where you either didn't or did utilize the SBI model? Heidi, I see you laughing, smiling.
I'm laughing, but Rebecca has a great grin on. So Rebecca, I'm letting you go.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I use the SBI model with one of my more boisterous team members. This person, very loud, loved to be heard. They were also one of the top producers of the team. So I was in sales leadership at the time. And so sometimes when you've got this person who's just doing all these great things, they just get to act any way that they want, right? A lot of leaders just let them be anyone that they want, act any way that they want, no matter to the detriment of the team. And I had a relationship with this person because I had worked side by side with them, moved into the leadership role, established the trust. Again, I can't emphasize how important that is. But because I had the established trust, I could be very specific using the SBI model in the behavior that I saw. First of all, I allowed them to behave a certain way. Okay. I didn't just cut them off because I needed to see how it affected people, how it affected them, how it affected the team. I needed to allow that to happen so that I could address it individually with this person. And using this, taking that emotion out, that can be very hard to do. Okay. Depending on who your audience is, it can be really hard to do that. So take the emotion out and say, it's time for us to discuss what happened here, right? I'm going to set this is the scenario, obviously, right? Are we in agreement? Yes. This is the behavior that I saw you display. This is what I saw the impact to the team, or this is the impact that I incident. And so I really had to strongly bring them to task on their behavior as an individual, but also as part of the team. And then this is really important, getting their thoughts. And at the time I had this conversation, and this happens a lot, that person was not ready to give me their thoughts. They wanted time to marinate on this conversation. And they said, hey, can you give me time to think about this? Can we revisit this at this time? That's perfectly fine. I'm okay with that. I don't just jam it down their throat and, hey, give me your thought. Now, what are you thinking? Right? Give them time to think about it, revisit this. And by the way, this is answering one of your questions that you guys had posted, how do I deal with the person after the conflict's been resolved, right? Go back and check in with them. Make sure that we're still on the same page. Make sure that we're doing check-in. Observe them, observe their behavior, whether it's individually or as a team. That's something that you as a leader should be doing on a regular basis. And then just as a leader, anytime that you see the behavior that you're looking for, right, that they display, that they were able to they held themselves in check and you saw it and you knew it, bring it up with them in the conversation individually. Tell them, this is the behavior I saw. This is the situation. This is the behavior I saw. This is the impact it had. Again, SBI model, but that's for good as well as conflict.
Right.
Good stuff. Good stuff. And the key thing is making it safe, right? And focusing on the goal. Remember, I just mentioned how, usually when things are getting emotional, one of the things that we recognize is that the goal was to win, and then people are going back and forth, and that's when things get emotional. So it's important that we look at some of these unhealthy goals and also the good goals, right? The goals of the dialogue should be to learn, find the truth. You definitely want to produce results. And Rebecca, you mentioned this earlier about those relationships. You want to build those strong relationships. So the things you, of course, look at the unhealthy goals, right? You want to be right, you want to look good, keep pace, and there it is, win, right? But that's usually when there are unhealthy goals, that's when things start to get awry and they start to get emotional. So one of the first things I remember I mentioned about pause. So when I pause, the first thing you should do, or first thing I do, is I look at me. Okay, what am I trying to do here? And sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes I recognize that I'm really in it to win and not really trying to find the truth of what's really good for the team or for the project. So that's one of the things when I pause, I first check myself, and then I pause and say, hey, it looks like so-and-so is trying to, they're just trying to jump in to win or what have you. So that's when it's time to pause so we can process, so that we can respond instead of react, right? Mm-hmm. And it's very important. So one of the things that we do is that when you take that time to pause, you want to ask yourself those questions or these questions. What do you really want? Like when we think about that conflict, hey, what are we trying to resolve? What do you really want? And when you ask that question, you're asking not just for yourself, but also for others, and also in the relationship, because you're thinking about, hey, guess what? We're working together. This is an office environment. We're working together. What do you want for yourself? What do you want for others? And what do you want in the relationship? Now, when you think about all that, how would you behave if you really wanted what's best? I'll pause there for a reason. Think about that. Sometimes we don't think about that ahead of time. How should I, or how will I act and respond if I really want what's best, right? And that's very important, because once you answer that question, then it's real simple. You just behave accordingly. When you guys see that on the screen, we got 5 minutes left, and we're going to dive in real quick to emotional. But before we do, emotional intelligence, what are your thoughts from this screen when you look at the slide? What are some quick thoughts that you have?
And this is what if you guys hear nothing after working on trust, if there's a lack of trust, there's a lack of productivity and openness on your team or with your partnerships, that's where to begin, right? Engaging and sharing and listening and working on one of those things, for the next 30 days until you start to see some movement and some change. After that, it's staying focused on what it is that you want before you step into the conversation, the intention. It's like, what's your carrot in front of your face before I go in and I have a conversation with Rebecca on what I saw at a meeting, or Derek at what I saw at a meeting, or whatever. And then if my goal is to be right and to tell Derek about himself and to tell him how he shows up all the time, right? You can see my behavior. I'm getting tense just saying that. I'm not ready. I am not ready, because I'm not going to preserve the partnership. I'm going to be rude. I'm going to try to talk over him and dismiss what he has to say, versus if I want to preserve the partnership, understand where he was coming from, right? I'm going to behave totally different. I'm going to be open. I'm going to be calm. You're going to be able to see it on my body language. Not perfect, guys. You could still be tense and irritated about something. Level of respect and kindness in your tone, but focusing on what it is that you really want and staying locked on that would be my piece of advice.
Awesome. And before we move before we go any further, I want to make sure we mention this. We have this training, emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. Mm-hmm. And it's so important that we think about the components of emotional intelligence and how important that is. Empathy and trust building, understanding and managing emotions. That is huge. And here's one of my favorite: communication and listening. Remember, we talked about, we stress listening, right? Managing negative expressions and the hostility that can happen. That's when things get very, very emotional. And then, of course, judgment and problem solving. One of the things you guys mentioned earlier is, hey, let's remove judgment from those things that we hear, and really, listen to understand and try to understand where the other person is coming from. Good stuff. We got a few minutes left. It's time for a little Q&A. Any questions? Who's manning the Q&A? Is that you, Rebecca, that's manning the Q&A?
That's me, and we've been manning it all the way through. So if you guys have posted, I've either answered your questions individually, or we've done a round robin with you guys. So we've gotten through the Q&A. I do want to thank Derek and Heidi for joining me today in this training. I hope it was valuable to you. Hope you guys got something from it. If you heard us talk about a topic that would like to see any, I want to encourage you to reach out to me. My email address is rebecca@puzzlehr.com. My phone number is listed here as well, because we will have another seminar in 3 months. And so we really want these to be valuable to you. And then if there is information that you would like on PuzzleHR, the services that we offer, that we can help you with, again, please reach out to me there. We've just got 1 minute left. So thanks again for joining us. It was great to be with you today. Thanks for the great participation as well. And we will see you in September or October. We'll be having our next seminar. So we look forward to it. Take care, everybody.
Awesome.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.